The Athletic released a survey, and the Oklahoma Sooners came out pretty favorably. We'll talk about that all on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to Locked On Sooners. Today's episode is brought to you by Stat Hero. Stat Hero is reshaping the way that you play fantasy sports. Dozens of house-based games to play daily, no sharks, no funky props, just your skill versus the lineups you choose. Sign up today at stathero.com/lockedon. And thank you for joining us. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. And joining me as he does every day is Josh Helmer. You can follow Josh on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also hear him daily, Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on 94.7 The Ref in Norman. Josh, man, how was your weekend? How you doing?
Doing great. You can actually read me a little bit through the radio station, sort of, through Boyd Street Magazine and 19th Street Magazine. We got a bunch of local coverage there. But, yeah, 94.7 The Ref on the radio side. What's up, man? Weekend was good. Lots of NCAA tournament watching. We have Final Four bids that have been punched. But, of course, a lot of Oklahoma softball, a lot of Oklahoma baseball. The weekend was good, man. How are you?
It was a busy weekend. And yes, the universe apparently wanted Duke UNC in the Final Four one more time with Coach K. And I think they're the only ones that really wanted that. I don't really care. I don't care to see Coach K win anymore. That's just me. But it was full of, we had our first soccer games of the season for our U6 Galaxy team, and we did pretty well for first week on the field, and then had my daughter's 6th birthday party, which was nuts and wonderful all at the same time. But I got way more sun than this fair-skinned Caucasian man was used to coming out of a winter that was really cold and cloudy. So, hey, getting that summer tan going, getting ready for it. Dude, do you see the Oscars tonight? Did you see Will Smith and Chris Rock get into it a little bit? Will Smith walking up on stage after a Chris Rock joke and smacking him across the face. This was like two 90s icons going at it. It's crazy.
Wild. So I wasn't watching the Oscars live tonight, but just perusing social media, how could you miss this between Will Smith and Chris Rock this evening? Wild. The lesson we learned, it's an age-old lesson. Don't talk about somebody's wife, right? And especially when there's a medical condition involved. The first thing I thought of after the dust-up here between Will Smith and Chris Rock, two guys I love, by the way. I mean, you mentioned it, 90s icons, larger than that for Will Smith. I mean, he's had a career that has spanned beyond just the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, all of the different movie roles that he has had. I mean, he's turned into an A-list Hollywood guy, but definitely each of these two guys in the 90s, bona fide superstars, two guys that I grew up loving. I hate to see them in this type of situation. The first thing I thought back to, remember the roast a couple of years back? I forget who it was for, but Amy Schumer made the Steve-O joke and mentioned one of the Jackass guys that had passed away. Steve-O didn't take very kindly to it. So you're kind of in that blurred boundary of, okay, what's acceptable of a comedian to say, even in a moment like the Oscars? A comedian would tell you everything, for the most part, is fair game, right? I'm sure that Chris Rock leaves this evening and feels like, well, I didn't cross a line. Certainly Will Smith felt like he crossed a line.
Yeah, and that's the question with comedy always is how far is too far. But it was such a surreal event. Who knows if it was real? Who knows if it was staged? It looked pretty real, and Chris Rock, the way he played it, made it feel very real to me. But let's get into some Sooners action. Let's talk about that Athletic article that got put out a few weeks back. They asked fans of the Big 12 to go in through there and vote on several questions, and we're going to run through it. And I'm going to ask Josh, because he hasn't looked at this yet, which is going to create really good discussion here, because the first question they asked was, who's your favorite team? Of all of the people that responded, there were more than 1,500 fans that responded. Josh, who do you think had the most votes on that one?
It was Oklahoma. It had to have been Oklahoma. Oklahoma, the way that they dominate social media, it had to be Sooner fans.
Yeah, it was 100. It was 16% of the respondents were Sooners fans, which led the way. Okay, let's run down and see if you can give me the top 5 after that. So we got Oklahoma 1.
Oklahoma 1. I'll say Texas had to be within those top 5. I'll
So they were number
say
3.
they were number 3. Okay. I'll say, man, after that, I'll say Texas Tech fans were in the top 5.
They
Yes,
were number
no?
6. They were number
Oh,
6.
man, just missed out. Oh, no.
Okay, and I also have to tell you, this includes the future Big 12 teams that are coming in: Cincinnati, BYU, UCF, and Houston as well.
Well, then was UCF one of the teams?
UCF was not one of the teams.
Oh,
They
man, I'm bombing.
were they were dead last. Maybe they don't have enough athletics subscriptions going right now.
So BYU, Cincinnati?
Cincinnati was number 2. BYU came in at number 7.
And then beyond that, I'm trying to think which fan bases are pretty active on social media that would have responded to this. I would have thought Texas Tech would have been one of the more passionate fan bases just in that regard. Not necessarily, the biggest fan base per se, but just in terms of engaging on social media, that's kind of what made me lean their way. Baylor?
Yeah, Baylor comes in at number 5, and then I'm going to give you Iowa State at number 4.
Okay.
So I was a little bit surprised too when I ran down that as well.
Okay,
so,
and what were the percentages? Because OU at 16, I would have thought that would have been higher.
Yeah, so Oklahoma at 16, Cincinnati 14.8%, Texas at 9.4, Iowa State 8.8, and Baylor 7.6. The bottom 5, this is a fun topic as well. So coming in dead last was UCF, Houston, then TCU, Kansas State, and Kansas. So I'm gonna give UCF a bit of a pass. They might not have the athletic Big 12 on their radar just yet. Being down there in the Southeast, they're kind of distanced a little bit from the Big 12 action, the Big 12 fodder. So we'll give them a bit of a pass because, they found my Dylan Gabriel article from a couple weeks ago and were pretty well miffed at what I had to say about their school. So I'm sure they'll have some things to say about their presence in that survey. Let's talk about the next one. Who will win the Big 12 in 2022? This is, again, more than 1,500 responses. We'll start first with just the overall response. Who do you think voters picked?
I think voters are expecting Oklahoma to bounce back and win the Big 12 championship in Brent Venables' first season.
Yeah, and so Oklahoma came in first, followed by Baylor, Oklahoma State, each garnering more than 20% of the vote. And then next was Texas at 7.5% of the vote. That kind of gives you a pretty good inclination of how the fan bases are feeling about these schools going into the 2022 season. They also broke this down by the fans that didn't vote for their team. So there were 1,000 voters that didn't pick their favorite team to win the Big 12 this fall. Who do you think was the leading vote getter out of that 38%, out of that group that didn't vote for their favorite team?
Well, if Oklahoma fans aren't voting for Oklahoma, I'm going to imagine that they voted for Baylor.
Yeah, that's exactly who. Baylor got 38% of the vote of the fans who didn't vote for their favorite team, followed by Oklahoma at 30%, Oklahoma State 25%, and then Texas at 5%. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the happiest, how happy are fans of the hire of Brent Venables? Just kind of give me a range here.
So they specifically asked Oklahoma fans how happy they were with the hiring of Brent Venables?
So the question was, how would you rate happiness with your team's head coach right now on a scale of 1 to 10? So I'm guessing they were able to break it down by Oklahoma fans' feelings about their head coach. So Brent Venables.
Well, it's sky high. It might not be 10 just because Oklahoma fans can't maybe say 10 without having seen him coach a game. I'm going to say that it's a solid 9.
Yeah, he comes in right at 9.18 as an average score. Who do you think had the highest score? Again, we're also including the future Big 12 schools in this as well.
Well, if you're including future Big 12 schools, it's probably Cincinnati's head coach.
Yeah, Luke Fickell comes in first, followed by Dave Aranda. And the next two I'm a little bit surprised by. Matt Campbell, who had a pretty disappointing season at Iowa State, a team that was really highly ranked, a top 10 preseason team, one projected to contend for the Big 12 and didn't win it and didn't even play in the conference championship game, going 7-6 last season. And then followed by Joey Maguire. That just goes to show you how excited that fan base is for the former Baylor assistant, former Cedar Hill head coach who won 3 state championships down there in Texas. So a lot of excitement about him. BYU fans love Kalani Sitake. He got a higher rating than Brent Venables did. Who do you think had the lowest score, the lowest average score of the Big 12 coaches?
Lowest average score for Big 12 coaches. I mean, I would have to think that Steve Sarkisian would be in the mix for that after a disappointing year one.
Yeah, so he had the third lowest score. Neil Brown out of West Virginia got the lowest, followed by Sonny Dykes. I was really surprised to see Sonny Dykes that low because he hasn't even gotten started yet. He's just barely going at TCU, and they're already down on him. I'm like, maybe they're just like hedging their bets, but it doesn't look like TCU fans are too optimistic about the Sonny Dykes tenure.
That's wild, and it shows you that big discrepancy between how Oklahoma fans feel about the hiring of Brent Venables and the way this has started here, how Texas Tech fans feel about the hiring of Maguire, and then how TCU fans feel, right? They're not nearly as satisfied with the hire that's been made as those two other respective schools.
Yeah, 100%. And we still haven't even talked about the most underrated coach, the most overrated coach, which we're going to talk to you after I talk to you about Stat Hero. Stat Hero is the place to play daily fantasy. It takes away all the gimmicks, all the chances for you to get in on funky props or long odds. Stat Hero gives you the advantage, resulting in their players winning 4 times more often. Why? Because Stat Hero eliminates the mystery about who or what you are going up against. In addition to their pick'em games, they also have dozens of lineups you can comb through to take on head-to-head. They simply post sets of players for you to take on with the set of players you choose. Stat Hero is the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix. The simple, sleek gameplay will have you playing in minutes. This is what daily fantasy was meant to be. If you've played daily fantasy sports and you're just not into it anymore, maybe give Stat Hero a try because it's like playing fantasy football with your friends where you can see what lineup they're picking and you can pick your lineup to go up against that as well. It gives you a little bit more insight into what is going on. So go to stathero.com/lockedon, use promo code lockedon for a 100% deposit match. You put in $100, they'll put in $100, match you 100% using our promo code lockedon at stathero.com/lockedon. And thanks for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We appreciate all the support, the comments, the feedback that we're getting over on the YouTube side of things. Make sure you're subscribed to the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available there as well. We're going to continue talking through the athletic survey that was done amongst Big 12 fans. On the other side of in the third segment, we're going to talk about some of the sports news from the Oklahoma Sooners athletics. Got some good highlights for you, as well as just walk-off magic, and that's always fun to talk about as well. So first, Josh, who is the Big 12's most underrated coach according to this fan survey done by The Athletic?
Well, I don't think it's going to be. I think if you had asked maybe a year ago, Matt Campbell might have won this vote. But as you mentioned earlier, it was a disappointing season for the Cyclones. I think he's way, way down and actually might be in the mix for most overrated Big 12 coach. Now, it's got to be our man Chris Kleiman at Kansas State.
Yeah, so he comes in at number 4, and it's Dave Aranda that comes in at number 1 with 25.6% of the vote. Mike Gundy comes in at number 2 with 24.2%, currently the longest tenured Big 12 coach and the Big 12 coach with the highest career winning percentage. If you take away Chris Kleiman's work at North Dakota State, which I do. I mean, it's great work that he's done over at North Dakota State, but let's be real, that's FBS or FCS. It's not FBS football, so it does count to an extent, but also you can't really, compare.
It's not Kansas State, right? It's not the Big 12.
Right. It's like playing. If you're Alabama, your career winning percentage is going to be pretty high. Lance Leipold comes in at number 3. 15.6% of the vote, which I thought was pretty good. Like, I'm a big Lance Leipold fan. I think he's done a really, really good job at Kansas. I think they're on an upward trajectory. How quick is that climb going to be is the big question. I don't think they're going to be able to kind of break into the upper half of the Big 12 in the standings in 2022. But if they can just get out of last place this next season, I think that'll continue to show that they are on an upward trajectory. And God help whoever potentially finishes behind Kansas next year, that won't go well for that head coach. All right, now the most overrated head coach in the Big 12. Who's this going to be?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt that fans feel like it's Steve Sarkisian.
Yeah, and it's 53.1% of the vote went to Steve Sarkisian, and I think it's justified. I mean, this is a guy that came in with a ton of hype because of his stint at Alabama and the offensive production that they had there. Came into Texas with really high expectations and started off the season fairly well, and then the second half collapse against Oklahoma led to a really long losing streak, including a loss to Kansas, which is going to be hard for any coach to outlive. And a 5-7 season and no bowl game. I mean, it was pretty bad. It never got that bad under previous head coaches since their national championship win.
We'll see, right? I mean, this is a telling year two for Sarkisian and Texas. And I sort of always held the belief, John, that after the last couple of tenures here before Sarkisian, what we saw with Charlie Strong, what we saw with Tom Herman, I probably gave those guys almost too long of a leash early. I said coming into this hire of Sarkisian that I was going to have a great idea of how this thing was going to turn out for Texas after year one of Sarkisian. And obviously year one for Texas and Sarkisian, total disaster. So they've got excitement in terms of the quarterback in Quinn Ewers. Maybe that could be the spark that they need to turn this thing back around. But if it doesn't happen quickly this season, I think that we're not too far away from Texas being in the market for another head football coach again.
Yeah, he's not going to be able to withstand another 5-7 season. He's going to have to show some improvement, especially if he's going to go with Quinn Ewers, who hasn't played at the college level many meaningful snaps. I mean, he had the quarterback kind of disaster last year where, he came out of the season or out of the fall camp with Hudson Card as a starter. Just a couple games in, he's going to Casey Thompson. And I mean, it was just okay. And some of it wasn't all offense. A lot of it was on the defensive side of the football too, but he's responsible for that. He's got to be the guy that makes sure that the defense is holding up their end of the bargain. And as we've known at Texas for quite some time, recruiting has never been the issue. It's about getting those players to live up to that 4 or 5 star billing that Texas regularly brings in. And maybe it's becoming if we don't see Steve Sarkisian turn it around, maybe it's beyond the coaching. Maybe there's a culture, system, program thing that's taking place at Texas that's never going to really allow it to ascend higher than their recruiting rankings, because it's been a long time since they've been a team that's gone up into the top 10 and stayed there throughout the season.
They're going to have to, Tom Herman got them to the Big 12 championship game, but of course they lost to Oklahoma. You think back, the big play from Trey Brown for the safety in that game. And at the time, maybe you thought, okay, this was Texas sort of back on the rise back up. Of course, that's not been the case. They've gone back in the opposite direction. They need to get back into legitimately competing for a Big 12 championship game appearance and getting into a Big 12 championship game. And then obviously you can't say you're back until you win said Big 12 championship game. So this is an important year for Texas, and there's not going to be a lot of excuses on the offensive football. A lot of people felt like last season Texas had a Heisman Trophy type candidate in its backfield, right? A Doak Walker type player in its backfield. Now you've got Xavier Worthy on the outside as a wide receiver. So there's no excuses for the offense. They obviously need to tighten up that defense, though, and they need to get great quarterback play if Ewers is the guy. The most underrated coaches. I would have thought that winning the Big 12 championship for Dave Aranda would kind of automatically remove him from consideration for that. I'm all about it. I mean, obviously Aranda deserves all the love and the decorations and the flowers and all of the attention and all of that. Can you call somebody underrated when they just won the Big 12 championship?
I think it's so much because of his personality. He's just the most understated head coach. He just doesn't say a lot and he doesn't get emotional. And so maybe it's just the personality that has people just still not like thinking highly of him because he's not this charismatic speaker in the media or, in the locker room necessarily, but he's just a guy that knows football and gets the job done. And I think a lot of times those like lunch pail guys, they fly under the radar a little bit, like I'm not going to, I almost compared him to Rudy, but it's not even the same situation. But like, just think about the guy that's on your favorite football team that is just the hard worker, gets after it, first to show up, last to leave kind of a guy. Like, I feel like that's like Dave Aranda fits all those cliches. And that might be why, he's not flashy. He's not, coming in with all the accolades as, some of these other guys are, or a lot of pomp and circumstance, but he's just a guy and he just does his job and he does it really, really well. And maybe people are kind of hedging and not sure whether the turnaround from year 1 to year 2 is legit. And they're maybe waiting to see a year 3 to make sure that, yes, this is what Dave Aranda's football program is going to be like. But I think you're right. Most people agree that Dave Aranda is a really, really good coach. And I don't know if it's just the way that it was phrased. It's just like, yeah, Dave Aranda is still kind of underrated because he's not being considered for a bigger job somewhere else. Like he didn't, get the bump to LSU or to go take a Miami job or something like that. So I don't know, that might be something to it, but also that was just the dude's second year at the program. And yes, college football coaches leave a lot, in some really weird circumstances, and time frame doesn't really seem to matter. But I don't know. I would have a really, really hard time if I were a head football coach just coming on board 2 years and then be like, all right, I had a really great season, won the Big 12, peace. See you later. I'm out.
And
So
Mike Gundy sort of, he's not similar to Aranda in that respect because he is the longest tenured coach in the Big 12 conference. But isn't Mike Gundy sort of rated just right? He's not overrated. He's not underrated. We know who Mike Gundy is. Once every several seasons, he's going to have Oklahoma State put together the type of season, maybe not defensively that they did last season because that was historic, what was going on with Oklahoma State's defense. That's uncharted territory for them. But we kind of know that they're always going to be on that doorstep, 8, 9, 10-win season. And once every 3-4 years, they're going to have a chance to contend and perhaps win a Big 12 championship, right? So to me, Mike Gundy wouldn't be somebody that I would consider underrated. That's why, again, I'm looking in the direction of somebody like Kleiman that hasn't won a Big 12 championship yet, hasn't played for that yet, or like Leipold at Kansas, what they did last season. I think you're exactly right about that. I mean, even the years that Kansas, with previous head coaches, with Les Miles, excitement on the recruiting trail and this and that, didn't last season just feel different with KU? And it was sort of highlighted and punctuated by the win at Texas. Like you could tell last season, okay, and it's been a long time since you could say that about Kansas. Wow, this is a Kansas team that's actually made some progress.
Well, even in the loss to Oklahoma, I mean, they had that 10-0 lead at halftime. They made Oklahoma work for every single inch in that second half, even though Oklahoma scored 35 points in the second half and went on to win. It was a very different Kansas team. And we saw it, I think, over the second half of the season. I feel like that game gave them a ton of confidence for the second half of the season to play a lot of close games. And they had 2 one-score losses in their final 3 matchups. And so, yeah, it was a team that was on a different trajectory than Kansas teams that we've seen in the past just kind of show up and get blown out. I mean, Kansas is not going to be an easy out for anybody moving forward. And I think that's really great for the Big 12. It's not great for the teams that might end up losing to them, but it's good for the conference as a whole. Real quick, just the most overrated coach. It's funny to me that Brent Venables shows up here. 5.2% of the vote. Now it's not very much. It's a low margin, but he only got 1.4% of the most underrated coach vote. But I mean, it's hard to underrate a coach that we've not seen. It's also hard. I think it's easy to overrate a coach because there's a ton of excitement about Brent Venables, and I think there's a lot of optimism about where he's taken the program in 2022 and beyond. But yet we haven't seen it on the field yet.
Yeah, and quite frankly, what did you say? 5.4%?
Yeah, as the most most overrated.
And based on the feeling that I have, that you have, that a lot of people in the Oklahoma market have, and that the Oklahoma fan base has, quite frankly, maybe we are out in front of our skis a little bit with Brent Venables a little bit too fast, too soon. Time will tell. He's not coached a game as a head football coach. We think we know what we're getting, though, in Brent Venables. He's a guy that has coached in 8 national championship games, obviously has been a part of winning 3 of those national championships, one of which, sure, it was a while back at Oklahoma, but he was a part of winning that national championship in Oklahoma, and we see what he's doing on the recruiting trail, the type of mindset, the changes around the program top to bottom. We see it, we feel it, but maybe that is a little overrated until you go out and do what Oklahoma typically and historically has done, and that's win a Big 12 championship. And hey, they get that 5% overrated, John, or Brent Venables does, and yet, hey, the fan bases picked Oklahoma to win this conference, right? So you tell me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Brent Venables will tell you the same thing. Is like, we haven't done anything yet. There's no reason for us to be like considered one of the best teams in the Big 12 or the country or anything like that, because we have to go out there and we have to prove it every single day. I've never met Brent Venables in person, but just the clips that I've seen, the interviews that I've watched, I feel like that's the thing he would tell you is like, no, we've got to go earn it every day. Like, nothing is given to us. We've got to get out there. We got to work. We got to prove ourselves every single day and go win a game every single week. So that's just me. We'll talk more about this athletic survey because there's still several more questions that we got to get through. But we want to talk about some softball and baseball after the break. But let me tell you about Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. Easy to eat, 100% covered in chocolate. It tastes great, and it's great for you. Anywhere from 130 to 170 calories, 4 or 5 grams of sugar, 4 or 5 grams of net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And they've got great flavors. Peanut butter brownie. That's my favorite all time. Every time I can always go down for a peanut butter brownie. Also mint brownie, coconut almond. And this month they've got white chocolate cookies and cream. They're always coming out with new flavors as well. So go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15. Hey, the other great thing they've got over at built.com is something called Built Boost. If you're into Gatorade, Powerade, you need like vitamin drinks, you like vitamin drinks this time of year with all the allergens, and it's like cold season extended. I've been running the cold, if you can't tell in the voice. Get some Built Boost. They got great flavors in that too. I love the lemon lime, and you can get that with our promo code too at built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order over at built.com. All right, Josh, weekend scoreboard rewind. We got baseball, we got softball. It was a great weekend, a lot of dramatics. How did baseball do for them?
Well, I've been difficult, right, on Oklahoma baseball in recent weekends where maybe they lost a series that you felt they were the better team between the two. It didn't work out for Oklahoma. That wasn't the case for OU in its Big 12 opening series in conference play, which ended, John, with some dramatics on Saturday.
6 career home runs for Treadaway. He blasts one to left, hits deep, track, whoa, gone! A grand slam, Tanner Treadaway, and we are tied in Norman. Oliver versus Graham, the pitch. Swung on and driven to left and deep, and it is gone! It's a walk-off grand slam for Peyton Graham, and you can unhitch the wagon.
Oh,
Incredible.
Go crazy. Go crazy,
Incredible.
Toby Rowland. Go crazy on the berm, baby.
Yeah. Grand slam to tie the game. Grand slam to walk it off. Just unreal heroics in that game on Saturday. It was crazy.
So Oklahoma wins its Big 12 opening series versus Baylor. They, I believe, won Friday 5-3. And, of course, you just saw right there. Late game grand slam to tie it and walk-off grand slam to win it. They didn't win the getaway game here in Norman on Sunday, so they lost that one. But, hey, Big 12 series opener, they win that versus Baylor. So great start for baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. And softball continued its run as well. Had a 3-game set against Baylor over the weekend. Run ruled the Friday and Saturday wins over Baylor to extend their run rule record now. What is that now? 24, 25 run rule wins this year, and are now 29-0. And on Sunday, things didn't go so simply. Oklahoma was down 1-0 in the bottom of the 7th.
First pitch is lifted pretty deep to left field. It's not going to be deep enough, and if it's caught, it's going to end the game, but it's missed. So here's the first pitch to, or the 0-1 pitch to Hansen. Looper, right field. If it falls, it's in. It's in, a base hit. First pitch is looped into left field. It falls for a base hit.
Tons of room in the outfield.
The 3-1 is lifted pretty deep to center field. T.R.A. Jennings called game. Jennings called game. Oklahoma wins it on a walk-off 3-run bomb from T.R.A. Jennings. Win column Sooners. Game over.
The Sooners got the win with a walk-off home run from T.R.A. Jennings, a 3-run home run in the bottom of the 7th. And we didn't mention it, but there were 2 outs on the board. And so every single hit that they got was with 2 outs on the scoreboard, and they were able to come away with a huge win and keep the undefeated season alive.
Wild. And how about Kinsey Hansen pops that one up over to left? You think, oh no, it's just not going to be a perfect season. And nope, no big deal. If harmlessly finds the grass out there and left, and then of course back-to-back knocks before you clear the stage for T.R.A. Jennings to hit the walk-off 3-run bomb. I mean, did you expect any different with Oklahoma softball? Incredible.
No, it's like once they got that extra breath of life there from the drop pop fly, you're like, okay, it's our game. We got our second chance here. And, Oklahoma has been in several situations like that this year where, against Tennessee, when they were out in California, they were down twice in extra innings. We're down at the end of the 7th and then down once in extra innings. And they had to have these heroics to overcome those deficits, and they were able to do it. And I think this just goes to show, like, this is a team that has faced some adversity throughout this season, but they're still finding ways to overcome it and to win games along the way, which is the most incredible part of it. Last year, they faced adversity and they lost some games, it's typical. It's not unreasonable to see a team go a season without losing a softball game or a baseball game. It's just hard to be on for 50, 60 games. But this team so far through 29 games has done everything they needed to do to win the game.
And the other part of that too, John, is this. You could be just a little bit off one day and somebody, leaps up and gets you. The other part of that is that everybody's on when they play Oklahoma, right?
Right.
I mean, everybody, you're getting their best shot no matter what, because you're number one Oklahoma. You're unbeaten. There's all these accolades. Jocelyn Allo's the home run queen. Jordy Ball's the freshman sensation in the circle. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Defending national champion. Nobody's taking the afternoon off when they play Oklahoma. And so Sunday versus Baylor, a nice reminder that, what we talked about last week with whether it's Oklahoma State or Texas, one of those teams in a rivalry game, giving Oklahoma a tough out and potentially winning one of those games in those series, probably you can almost bank on that type of scenario happening. And instead, you know what? Before we even got to either of those 2 series, it was Baylor on a Sunday reminding us that you're not just going to cruise to an undefeated season. Even as great as Oklahoma is, like you and I know how great Oklahoma is, but teams, they want to spoil the perfect season for Oklahoma. But again, incredible. The heroics, just Patty Gasso, just Oklahoma softball, just T.R.A. Jennings.
It's just so fun to watch. And whether they go undefeated or not, they're on pace for another historic season, which is incredible to think that they can back up what they did last year and potentially have an even better year this year. And we'll continue following it here on Locked On Sooners. Again, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. It's free and available. Subscribe on YouTube. Let us know how you feel about the show. Give us a question. Drop us a comment. Drop us a thought on how you feel about the Big 12 survey that The Athletic put out. We'll talk more about that on the show later this week, and might have it's pretty confirmed, but we're locking things up with Park Bethune to come back and talk about Oklahoma's big recruiting weekend to give us his insight from OU Insider 247 Sports and also the Ref over at 94.7 in Norman. So make sure you're listening to Josh 9 to noon over there at 94.7 the Ref in Norman. Check out my work covering the Sooners over at thesoonerswire.com. And until tomorrow, he's Josh Helmer. I'm John Williams. Boomer Sooner.